In 1912, the Titanic was the largest, most luxurious steamship ever built. Its great engineering and complexity earned it the name the unsinkable ship. The Titanic left from England, made 2 stops, then set off for their final destination of New York. It would have taken approximately 6 days to get to New York, but sadly on the 3rd day of the journey, the gigantic ship hit an iceberg. The unsinkable ship slowly sank 2.4 miles until finally resting at the bottom of the ocean. Although the Titanic was a tragic event, the story still lives on. The Titanic was introduced by the White Star Line in order to outdo the Cunard Line, another ship company. Cunard had recently released 2 fast ships, the Lusitania and Mauretania, and in order to surpass them, the White Star Line introduced the huge ships, the Olympic, Titanic, and Gigantic, later named Britannic. These names reflected their massive size. They were 50% larger and twice as luxurious as the Cunard ship. Bruce Ismay, head of the White Star Line, announced, "Our ships will be the largest, most elegant liners afloat, and we'll have people lining up to buy tickets." Bruce Ismay, the White Star Line's chairman, proposed the idea of the Olympic ocean-class liners in the mid-1907. He was determined to exceed the Cunard Line, their biggest rivals. Bruce wanted to compete in size rather than speed, so he put their biggest shipbuilders, Harland and Wolff, to work. They brought out their best designer, Thomas Andrews. On July 29, 1908, the design was finished and shown to the chairman, in which he approved of. The design was the Olympic, which the Titanic was based off of. The construction of the Titanic started on March 31, 1909 in Belfast, Northern Ireland, shortly after the start of the Olympic. They were both built alongside each other at the same facility. The Titanic would take 2 more years to complete, costing somewhere around 1.5 million euros, which would be $7.5 million US dollars, and $120 to $150 million today.
In the end, the Titanic weighed about 446,000 gross registered tons and was 882 feet wide, 175 feet tall, and had a total of 9 decks. It was also the length of 40 buses. It had 20 boilers and furnaces that burned through 650 tons of coal a day, cranking out 16,000 horsepower.
This steamship had to go through sea trials, so on Tuesday, April 2, 1912, 8 days before it was set to leave, the Titanic left the docks of Southampton. These trials were just a number of tests to ensure the safety and quality of the Titanic. The Titanic ended up leaving on April 10, 1912, with 324 first-class passengers, 284 second-class, and 709 third-class passengers. The price of the tickets varied depending on which class you were in. First class was around $4,300, third class was $36. In all, there were 3,500 people aboard, including workers. There were many facilities on board the Titanic to keep the passengers happy, including a swimming pool, a gymnasium, a squash court, Turkish bath, an electric bath, and a veranda cafe. This ship was said to be one of the most updated ships of that time, even for the third-class passengers. The Titanic left on April 10, 1912. Thousands of people were there just to watch the massive ship take off. People loaded up their things and got in themselves. The Titanic slowly drifted off into the ocean, heading towards Cherbourg, France. They made their stop in France, picking up and dropping off people, then headed to Queenstown, Ireland as their last stop. Then they set off for their destination in New York. They planned to land on April 16, 1912. People relaxed, enjoyed the ride, and ate a lot of food. They had approximately 40 tons of potatoes, 3,500 pounds of tomatoes, 7,000 heads of lettuce, 1,500 gallons of fresh milk, 40,000 fresh eggs, 3,500 pounds of onions, 800 bundles of asparagus, 800 pounds of tea, 36,000 apples, and 36,000 oranges.
The crew received radio calls of iceberg sightings from other ships. All the icebergs were located along the route to New York. On the cold, windy night of April 14th, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee settled down into the crow's nest, preparing for the night. Then at around 11:40 p.m., they saw an ominous object looming in the vast, eerie ocean. They realized that it could only mean one thing: an iceberg. They quickly called in the news to Captain E.J. Smith. All the crew was in disarray. Workers frantically ran around trying to warn everyone. They tried their best to save the ship, and at the last minute, the captain steered away from the iceberg, allowing it only to scrape a gash into the side of the ship instead of hitting it head-on. The iceberg cut a hole into the hull between 220 to 240 feet long. water rushed in at an estimated 7 tons a second. The hit was so soft that no one felt a thing. Workers realized they were in big trouble and calculated that they only had 2 hours left before they sank. They tried to radio in other ships for assistance, but they could only contact one, the Carpathia. It was at least 3 hours away and would not arrive in time to save them. Officers frantically tried to haul passengers into the lifeboats, but some of the passengers didn't think it was going to sink, so some of them refused to get in. Not enough people were getting in them to fill them completely, so they were lowered half full into the ocean. Only 705 people got seats in them. The rest could only hope for the best. By 2 a.m., the Titanic was tilted so much that water was lapping over the bow. Everything was sliding down into the ocean. The people in the lifeboats were watching from afar with terrified looks. The front half of the ship broke off and went plunging down, along with the back half a few seconds later. It torpedoed down and finally came to a rest 2.4 miles below the surface of the water. The Carpathia arrived at 3:30 a.m., over an hour after the Titanic had sank. They took aboard the 705 survivors and tended to them. The passenger survivor rate was On April 18th, the Carpathia docked into New York, where people were waiting to greet their survivors. Lots and lots of newspapers were made on the Titanic, spreading the news of the terrible wreck. The tragic story has now been turned into many movies and books. They also have passed laws requiring boats to have things like enough boats to see every person on the ship, and a radio operator has to be on duty 24 hours a day. They also now have ice patrols near icebergs. These were put into place in order to keep passengers safe in an emergency like the Titanic. Some of the rich survivors tried to locate the sunken ship, but it was not discovered until 1985. Even then, they could only take pictures of it because to haul it up would be practically impossible. Some of the attempts to recover items were led by Dr. Robert Ballard. Items such as jewelry, cutlery, dishes, tickets, playing cards, and clothing provided a picture of life on the Titanic. Even nowadays, we cannot bring it up. We have only been able to bring up parts of it. Along with the discovery, they also located some survivors who were on the Titanic.
First, no one thought anything was going to happen. But my father went away and spoke to an officer, and he said, they are going to launch lifeboats, but you will be back on board for breakfast. There wasn't any panic until the lifeboats left, and then there was panic galore. We were down on the ocean. We could hear them running about on the decks and screaming. You can imagine people came up from their cabin, went onto the deck, no lifeboat, tearing around the other side. That's when the panic was there. There wasn't any panic at the time I got in the lifeboat because there weren't enough people up there.
Although the Titanic was a tragic event, it helped us take extra precautions to prevent any other dangerous circumstances that might result in death. People have been trying to find explanations for why the Titanic sank. I believe that there is no exact reason and many contributing factors. There are many unanswered questions about the Titanic. People assumed because the boat was luxurious and large that it would never sink, but sadly the iceberg won the battle and sent the Titanic to a water grave on the ocean floor.